Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Hope City. My name is Pastor Peter. If I haven't met you, I'd love to do that afterwards. Today is a great day. We want to celebrate all of the men in the room. Thank you for your influence. Thank you for investing your time, your energy, your attention into your own kids, the kids around you, the kids in our community. We hope that today, quite honestly, that you feel celebrated at Hope City. I hope that you walk away from here being like, that's a place that genuinely cares about me for who I am. And we want to acknowledge, how many of you are raising kids, whether they're born into your family or you just have loved them like family. There's something incredible about being a dad, about playing that role in the life of a child. These are my three kids. I've had this opportunity to be a dad for almost 13 years now. And I've got to tell you that, honestly, there is no greater honor than being their dad. These guys bring me so much joy. Between Noah, Grace, and Leah, they bring me so much joy, so much laughter. But can we be honest? Like, they just wear me out too, right? Like, they're not in this room right now, so I can say this openly. But I love seeing them grow. I love seeing them take some steps forward. But what I love even more than that is, as a dad, I love the responsibility that I have, that God has designed for me in their life, and that is to design me to help them become the person that He's created them to be. Which is why on Father's Day, we're going to talk about a classic concept of good versus evil, right? Like every dad in this room, you know that when that child was born, it's this little bundle of good and a whole lot of evil, right? Like it is some craziness. Matt, our worship leader here, he and his wife, he had nothing to do with having the baby. Actually, Paige did all that work. But he's now realizing, wow, this is an incredible journey of good versus evil, because we know that these little beautiful baby bundles, they grow into these gigantic gremlins that just eat us out of house and home and terrorize the neighborhood. And so we send them into Bel Air and they become the Fresh Prince and all that stuff. So what do we do with this? What do we do with good and evil? And you think that all this is cute and cuddly, and then we end up saying things like, where did my little baby go? What happened to that precious little kid? Well, today we're continuing in our series at the movies. We've got 2 more weeks in this series, including today, and we're going to go back to a movie that has made, in the box offices around the world, catch this, this movie series has made $9.25 billion in ticket sales alone. $9.25 billion. That's a lot of tickets. Any guesses what this movie is? I know you heard Kevin talk about it, that it was his favorite. So any guesses? Sweet Home Alabama? That's right. That's it. That is his favorite. Or fried green tomatoes. Just kidding. Somebody said it over here. They said Star Wars. That's absolutely right. Star Wars alone, not with merchandising, not with anything else, they've made $9.25 billion just in ticket sales over all of their movies. But recently they were bought out by Disney. Star Wars is a legendary movie. But there were none more legendary than this movie. Check out this trailer right here for The Force Awakens. So for all you dads who didn't know what you were going to be doing today, you're welcome. I figured it out for you. You can go and get that on Redbox or something. But you'd have to be from a galaxy far, far away not to know the story of Star Wars, right? Star Wars is this cosmic drama, this with legendary players. You've got, Luke Skywalker, Han Solo, Princess Leia, and of course, Darth Vader. How many of you remember seeing the original Star Wars in the movie theater? You remember seeing those things? Okay, everybody else, look around. Those are the old people in the room, okay? Yeah, it's true. It's true. You just dated yourself. But this is a great story. It's a story that actually spans the test of time, because it's the story of the Rebel Alliance, that this ragtag group of people who were opposed to the evil of the Galactic Empire, or more recently called the New Order, led by Darth Vader, Kylo Ren, and the likes. See, Star Wars is a classic story of good versus evil. The hero against the villain, the light overcoming the darkness, and Luke versus Darth Vader. But before you think Darth Vader is all that bad, I actually think the guy gets a pretty bad rap. He's actually not a bad guy, inspiring people around the world with quotes like this: "Strong people don't put others down; they lift them up." Right? Remember that scene, Darth Vader? I love this philanthropist. Right? He's just out there trying to help people. Come on. But there's a reason why Star Wars never gets old and never goes out of style. They can make $9.25 billion. Why? People are happy to shell out that money, even though we pretty much know the plot line. We pretty much know what's going to happen. We're just not sure how it's going to happen. But we understand because it's a story of good versus evil. It's going to be the underdog against the empire. Evil will try with everything that it has to overcome the good, and good will push back with all of its might against evil. And in that, legends are born. In that moment, this legendary story, this legendary plot line begins to unveil itself. We know the stories of Luke and Leia and Rey and Finn because we've seen Han and Yoda, and they've reached this legendary status in our mind. The story is strangely familiar because it actually reminds us of the original story, of God's story, and maybe even our story. See, from the beginning of time, in a galaxy that looks just like ours, seemingly far, far from today, there's been a cosmic battle going on between the forces of God and the new order of Satan and his evil hordes. See, we see this story playing out throughout Genesis from the very beginning of the Bible, the beginning of God's Word. You open that Bible up and you can see within the first several pages that there is a cosmic battle that's going on between the forces of good and evil. We see the lives of Adam and Eve, and what do? They get put into this beautiful garden, and all of a sudden, Adam and Eve have this idea that they're going to live life on their own, for their own. They're going to live by their own rules. God said, there's one rule: don't touch that tree in the middle of the garden. Don't eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And Satan, the new order, comes in, and he's like, you can do it. You can do it. Did God really say? And he challenges them in everything. And they say, no, we're going to throw off God's plans and we're going to live according to ourselves. And then just, a chapter later, we see the story continues. This time there's two brothers, Cain and Abel. And we know that siblings don't always get along, right? I mean, not at least in my house, they're not perfect. I don't know about yours. If they are, let's talk. But Cain and Abel, instead of just throwing a right hook, Cain decides to strike his brother Abel with a rock and kills him, wipes him out. We know that the story of good and evil kind of runs throughout all of life, certainly throughout all of Scripture. And the world has only grown in wickedness and evil. See, for centuries, we see men and women who have chosen to live life on their own, for their own. They've rebelled against God, and the Bible calls this sin. Sin will always 100% leave life feeling broken and bankrupt. You need to hear me say this very clearly, that sin will leave you feeling broken and bankrupt. Sin has this idea that you're going to feel better about yourself, that you're going to be more comfortable, and it will leave you totally feeling the opposite way. See, the moment that sin enters the world, it fractures a relationship between God and man. God intended to have this perfect relationship between him and you and I, and yet sin sneaks in and it breaks that relationship. My mind thinks about it like this. I actually picture sin a lot the way that I picture an air mattress, right? How many of you have ever slept on an air mattress, right? The chiropractor around town thanks you for that because they're terrible. They look decent, put a decent fitted sheet on it and call it a day. Throw a blanket on top and you're like, wow, that could be good. Except somewhere along the line, usually around 45 minutes after you've fallen asleep, the thing starts to slowly go psst. And you're like, oh, who turned on the white noise? That's your air mattress deflating, okay? Or the way I look at it is this is what sin does. Sin invites us into something that's going to be comfortable. It looks comfortable, and we're like, yeah, let's do it. Sign me up. But it's actually a knockoff and a replica of the real deal. See, what happens is, I've got this in my pocket. This is a crossbow arrow, okay? Pretty cool. Never shot a crossbow. Would be interested in it, but never done it. But I can buy these on Amazon. So, I got one, and I'm like, this is what sin does. Sin, evil, Satan just punctures that air mattress and lets all the air out slowly, so that when you wake up in the morning, what are you doing? You're laying on the floor surrounded by like a deflated life raft, right? It's terrible. Nobody. You're crazy if you choose an air mattress over like a king's down bed that belongs in like the most prestigious hotels, right? Nobody wants to choose an air mattress when you can have the real thing. And yet, this is what sin does. But the good news for us is that humanity, even though we've bought the lie that sin is going to make us more comfortable, make us, experience more pleasure, more satisfied, God had a plan for that. The good news is that God had a plan, and even if it seems crazy, it may not look like what you and I would have come up with to overcome evil. God's plan was clear from the very beginning. God sent his son Jesus to be born as a baby, to grow for 33 years, to walk this planet, to show people what it meant to live in right relationship with God. And there, 33 years later, after living a sinless life, God allowed Jesus to be put to death on a cross and to die, so that you and I, that our sins could be forgiven, so that that brokenness, those deflated air mattresses, those moments that we've chosen something less than the original could be forever scrubbed from our history. See, without the cross, you and I, we can't be certain that we've been forgiven. The cross is critical to the life of the Christian. We can't downplay it, we can't reduce it, and we can't clean it up. The cross of Christ is our hope for the future. And that's why we talk about Jesus here at Hope City all the time. You may not agree with us, you may not believe the same thing as us, but this is what we're about. This is what we talk about, because I don't want to see any of you sleeping on an air mattress tonight. I want you to have the real deal, the original, what God has intended you to have. And see, this is the deal for us. You and I, we choose air mattresses from time to time. We choose a path that is in rebellion against God, but God does what only he can do. He takes rebels, he breaks rebels, he rebuilds them, and then he releases rebels with a cause. He's been incredibly clear with what that cause is, too. Look with me at Matthew chapter 5, verses 13 through 16. Check that out. It's on the Bibles around you on page 659, or if you brought yours with you, turn to Matthew chapter 5 this morning. See, Jesus is preaching one of the most famous sermons that he's ever given, and it was all about releasing people with a cause, releasing rebels with a cause. He's inspiring this group of rebels. Look at what he says. He says, "You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again?" Pretty good question. It's no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. You're the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. And then he goes, neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds, and they would glorify your Father in heaven. See, Jesus is daring a group of people to be legendary rebels, to be on par with the likes of Luke and Leia and Han and Rey, right? Jesus is saying this: resist the ordinary. Resist the ordinary. Because do you know what's ordinary? Salt that's good for nothing. Jesus says, you're the salt of the earth, but don't be the kind of salt that loses its saltiness. See, this doesn't make sense to us, because our salt, the things that you go to Publix and buy, that's all shelf stable. That's all been taken care of for you. But back in the day, back in Jesus' time, their salt would be coming from like salt marshes, and it was not pure in any way, shape, or form. It carried with it some toxins, and it carried with it some other minerals, trace minerals, things of that nature. And what would happen is that those things were less soluble than salt, and the salt would leach out. It would just kind of disappear, and you'd just be left with some dust that had maybe sort of tasted like salt, but actually was really good for nothing. And so Jesus is saying that, this can't preserve anything. Salt was a preservative. It can't preserve anything. It's not going to add any flavor to anything. It's just good for nothing. You've done a whole lot of work for nothing. And Jesus is charging a group of rebels to stand out, to be the flavoring agent in a world that causes people to take notice of the goodness of God, to preserve people and provide people with hope that God is greater than their fears, that God is greater than their biggest foe, that God is greater than even their strongest anxiety. Jesus uses another analogy, though. He says, you are the light of the world. He says, you're bringing light into the darkness. He's calling these rebels out, and he's challenging this rebel alliance, saying that the light should shine brightly for all to see. That's the purpose of light, right? Let it be so bright that in the darkest of night, that in the very pinnacle of darkness, that this light breaks in, so that the people that are in despair of darkness can set their eyes on the hope that you have in Christ. That even in the darkest day, they can see God because you're shining a light on Christ. See, what Jesus is saying is so interesting to me, because it's not about having this elaborate battle plan. It's not this, ridiculously difficult task. He's saying, start very small. Just start small. Be who you are and let God do great things through you. He's teaching this rebel group to start small. Because today, one of our big ideas, the premise of this morning, is that I think, and I believe that Jesus is showing us, that small decisions determine destiny. If you write anything down today, this is what I want you to walk away with, that small decisions determine destiny. Jesus knows this. Notice that he uses salt and light. Why? Because a little bit of salt can flavor an entire meal. How many of you have ever put a little too much salt and ruined an entire meal? Just a small amount, a small decision can have an impact that changes the course of the rest of your life. Same thing with light. The smallest amount of light. If you go into the darkest room possible, a room with no lights, no doors, all that, I don't know if that's possible, but somehow you get into a place that there is no exterior light. Just strike a match. Just simply strike a small match and hold it. And notice how much light breaks into the darkness, because a series of small decisions can have a huge impact in your life. See, we know this to be true. You guys know this to be true. It may even have been true in your life in one way or another. For the good, people will say things like, well, how did that person lose all that weight? Man, it's like they dropped the pounds. They're looking sharp, right? And if you go back to it, it all started with a very, very small decision. Like, it's not like they just went and ran, the Boston Marathon. They didn't just one day decide, oh, all right, today's the day. I'm going to go run a marathon. I'm going to go run a triathlon. I'm going to go do an Ironman. No, it started with one day the person said, you know what? I've had enough. I'm going to get off the couch. I'm just going to take one step forward. I'm going to start walking. I'm going to put one foot in front of the other, and the other, and the other, and I'm going to do this day after day, until something happens. And then a series of small decisions move that kind of move the ball forward. And then all of a sudden, everybody's like, well, how did you do that? It started with a small decision. Now, other people would ask the question, why did you do that? Right? Like, we've seen this play out in some negative ways as well. We've seen this play out in marriages. We've seen this play out in relationships where both the good and the bad, we've seen people who have lost everything. They've lost their wife, they've lost their husband, they've lost a spouse or their kids over a small decision, which led to another small decision. And before you know it, things have happened that they never could have imagined, right? It started with a drink, and then it led to a second drink. Or it started with a kind of a glance that turned into a stare, a look that turned into lust, and one small decision shaped your future and the future of those around you. Decisions have the ability to make all the difference, just like this. Check out this scene from Star Wars going way back. This is the scene where Luke, goes and he blows up the Death Star, but it was based on a series of small decisions. It's not this, gigantic explosion. It started in a place where he made the decision that he was willing to go do it, that it was that important that he would first take off. And then once he got there, he turned off his equipment and focused, and he used the Force, right? And he did everything he could to get that trajectory where he would launch that and the Death Star would be gone. See, sometimes our decisions, they impact our destiny because we've allowed these calculations. We've made them well, right? We've used the idea of like an arrow again. Like we've seen an arrow, and when you eyeing up, I've shot a bow and arrow, and I'm not very good at it because I know that process of lining that bow and arrow up, it's a whole series of calculations. It's figuring out the trajectory, and it's saying, if I point it in this direction at this angle with this much tension behind it, it's going to be released and it's going to hit the target in the bullseye. There's this idea that when you and I, we look forward, we have to determine where we're headed, what we're facing, and what we're looking for. We got to point our direction. We got to point our focus at that thing that we want to hit. Other ways, we're going to be known for hitting a target, or we're going to be known for missing the target. But it all starts with a simple decision. See, just like Luke, Leia, Rey, Finn, Han, we all want to be legends. I actually think that deep down inside of us, that as men, as women, as teenagers, we want to be legends. This led the artist Macklemore to write these lyrics. He said that I heard you die twice. In his song Glorious, he said, I heard you die twice, once when they bury you in the grave, and the second time is the last time that somebody mentions your name. The idea here is classic. It captures humanity. It captures our deep desire to be known. You know, that legendary status where somebody is telling stories about you, that they're stories worth telling. This is the idea that we have, that we want people to know our name. But see, as Christians, as followers of Christ, it isn't about people knowing our name or mentioning our name, but actually it's about knowing Jesus' name, that they would mention the name of God. And Jesus points this out in Matthew chapter 5, verse 16. Look at this again. He says, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. He says, let your light shine. So you play a role in this so that others can see it, and that they would say what? They would say God's name, not your name. They would say God's name. See, what if this morning you took Jesus at his word and lived a rebellious life to resist the ordinary? In fact, dads, I have 3 small decisions that you can make today to determine and impact your destiny. But this isn't actually just for dads. The cool thing is that I think all 3 of these decisions apply to every single person in this room. Whether you're married, whether you're single, whether you're in college, you're a student, you're graduated into the nursing home, whatever it may be, there's no age limit on this. And it can start today. You can make these decisions even right now. You know, it's been my prayer all week that these would be decisions that sink in and that would challenge us to our core. See, in order to be a legendary rebel, here's the first decision. We have to resist being ordinary by being a legendary rebel that's accessible. Dad, let me ask you, what gets your attention? You know, what gets your time? Time is clearly our greatest commodity. It's a limited resource, and what you choose to do with it, what you spend your time on, reveals what you value. As a kid, I grew up in New York City, in Floral Park, just outside of Queens, and then my family, we moved to Westchester, Pennsylvania, 2 totally different places, but there was one commonality between both of these things, and that was my parents. I had 2 parents that loved me, and my dad was a pastor for 25 years. I grew up with 3 sisters who loved me most of the time, although I will say I made it hard for them, so to be fair. But, my dad was a pastor, and he and my mom served the local church, like I said, for 25 years faithfully. And I'll tell you that I loved growing up in the house and watching them, and particularly watching my dad, because he would stand in a position like this, usually with a big pulpit, a big wooden thing right in front of him, and he would be talking to people just like you each and every week. And I remember watching my dad and hearing the words that he would say, but then going home and seeing what happened Monday to Saturday. And I'll tell you, the thing that impressed me, probably not so much as a kid, but more as an adult, is that the things that he would say on Sunday was what he lived on Monday through Saturday, every other day. See, I remember watching and listening to my dad one year. He said this phrase, and it's been burned into my memory. He said on Father's Day even, he said, "Dads, this is how your kids spell love. Time, time. That's the way that your kids spell love. It's not about the things you buy them. I can remember hearing him say this, but even more than hearing him say it, I can remember him living it. Whether we were, going for bike rides to the local park in New York, or playing wiffle ball in the driveway, or fast forward, he and I are under the hood of my car, and he's teaching me how to change the oil, or maybe it's behind a paintbrush or a roller in my first apartment. My dad was always accessible to me. There was nothing that ever prevented him from me having access to him. Men, be accessible to your kids. God's given us this example so that we should follow it, and we should do this for our kids, for those people that we love. Look at Hebrews chapter 4, verse 16. It says, "Let us then approach God's throne of grace with confidence so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need." The reminder here is that you and I, as followers of Jesus, we can go into the throne room of God. We can be in his presence with confidence. We don't have to kind of sneak in, tiptoe in and be like, oh man, I don't know what's going to happen here. See, who can go into the throne room? Who can go into anywhere, with confidence? Who can do that? A child. A child can, right? There's no other person that can do that. The only person who has 3 a.m. access to me every day is my kids. They come in the room and they're like, usually it's because they've puked. For whatever reason, they only puke at night. It's after the hours of 12:30 and generally before 6 o'clock. That's when the full-on barf fest is happening in my house. And there's nothing worse than waking up to somebody standing over you like this. Dad. You're like, what? I just barfed everywhere. Get out of here, right? You're afraid in that moment, this is what's going to happen to you. This is where it's all over for me. Now, I don't love vomit. I don't love throw up. I don't love cleaning it up. I don't love the smell of it. I don't like anything with it. But I'll tell you that in the middle of the night, I will get out of my bed and do anything I can for my kids because they're in pain and they need help. And now, my kids they're not afraid, can I go in and talk to Dad right now? I don't know, is it serious enough? They just come in, they just barge in, and they're like, listen, I've got a problem, I need you. And this is the kind of relationship that God has with us, those of us who follow Jesus. He's saying a legendary rebel is accessible, and we have that same access to God. A legendary rebel is accessible to those they love. And why is this rebellious? Because we live in a culture, we live in a world that says, being accessible is not a good thing. Being too accessible is actually negative. Let me ask you, on a scale of 1 to 10, how accessible are you to your kids, to your spouse, and to your friends? Not just when they're, barfing their brains out, but on a daily basis. The other day, Leah came into our family room, and I was sitting on the chair in the corner. I kind of was on my phone, and she came up to me, and she goes, "Hey, Dad, when you're not busy, can we play a game together?" Ugh. It actually it was like this arrow piercing my heart. Because you know what I was doing? I was on Instagram, probably looking at your pictures. In that moment, I couldn't care less what you were eating for dinner. My little girl was like, "Dad, when you're not busy, can you play games with me?" I was pretending to be busy, but I wasn't busy at all. I was projecting busyness. I was projecting importance. Yeah, just a second. When Daddy's done doing whatever Daddy's doing. Dads, how accessible are you? Another decision that makes rebels legendary is that a legendary rebel is honoring. Do you know who no one remembers? This is ironic. No one remembers the guy who's always saying his name. Crazy, right? I had to think back, who is that guy? This guy that I'm about to show you, this guy right here, number 81, who's this guy? Terrell Owens. Not many people. This guy is legendary for destroying football teams. You let him in the locker room and he's going to tear it up. Why? Because Terrell Owens would walk in and he'd be like, "I am the greatest. It is all about me. Why am I not getting enough passes?" He's a wide receiver that played for, he played for the 49ers, the Eagles, the Cowgirls, the Buffalo Bills, the Bengals. And listen, for 20 whole days, he was on the Seahawks. And then they removed him. For 20 days. That's crazy to me. T.O. is known as a toxic individual in the NFL. And here's the crazy part. This dude is actually a very talented football player. He was very good. But he was even better at making his name known and making sure that everybody else heard his name. Look at me. Look at how good I am. I'm going to put my arms down because they look small next to his, but that's okay. And here's the deal. The most recent thing that Terrell Owens was playing in, on June 28th, 2017, so not that long ago, Terrell Owens was playing as team captain. Don't miss that. Team captain for Team Owens in the inaugural game for the newly formed American Flag Football League. How do you go from playing in the biggest arena in the world to being the team captain of a team named after you in a flag football competition? You're the one that's shouting your own name. You're the guy that's making it all about you. See, legendary rebels, we rebel in the face of society that says, make it about you, have it your way, right? Romans 12, 9 through 10, it reminds us this, and I'm just going to remind you of this. He says, love must be sincere. Hate what is evil, cling to what is good, be devoted to one another in love, and honor, don't miss this, honor one another above yourself. Put other people up. Make other people feel important, right? A true legend honors other people. Sincere love is not self-serving, but one that serves other people. It clings to what is good. It makes small decisions, valuing the good in others. It abhors and hates evil. And it chooses to be devoted to one another in love. A legendary rebel is honoring. Men, are you honoring other people? And like I said, this applies to everybody in the room. So when I say men, are you honoring other people? This is a pointed question. Are you honoring your wives with your words and your actions? See, your children are always watching you. Like I talked about my dad, I'm always watching. They're always paying attention. The words that you speak in your house carry weight, especially when they're backed up by actions. See, a good word without a good deed is worthless. I'm just saying it. It's one thing to say something. It's a one thing to say, oh, your mother is the most beautiful woman on this earth, and then around town when your kids are riding in the car, your head is on a swivel as you're noticing every woman that walks by. See, words without action are very, very bland. They don't mean a whole lot. See, honor isn't just about sexuality or lust, though. Honor is also about an attitude that says you are valued, you are precious. A legendary rebel is honoring in a society that celebrates the meeting of your own needs first and foremost. It is rebellious to bend your will to another's. But a true legend, a legend that's remembered for years and years and years, is a legend whose impact is felt beyond their lifetime because a legendary rebel inspires legends. A legendary rebel inspires the next group of legends. See, there is legends whose name are written in books, stories are told around campfires, blogged about, Facebooked about, tweeted about, Instagrammed. These legends recognize something truly rebellious, that it's not about you. Listen to me. Too many of us are trying to build a platform rather than a legacy. Too many of us dads are trying to build a career rather than a legacy. And I want to remind you to create legends. Psalm 127, verse 3 through 4, say that children are a heritage from the Lord, offspring a reward from him. Like arrows in the hands of a warrior are children born in one's youth. The psalmist has something right here. This very same arrow, he's pointed out accurately, that if this arrow represents my son Noah, my daughter Grace, or my daughter Leah, that the way in which I point them, the words that I speak into their life, the things that I build into them, the values, the systems, the structure, the relationship with Christ. When they're 18 or whatever it is, when we get to launch them off into this world, that the mark that they leave on this world, it's made by small decisions that started the moment they were born. See, the most legendary thing that you may do as dads is raising and inspiring the next legend. Jesus says that you're the salt of the earth, you're the light of the world. So stand out. Bring that God flavoring to the worlds around you. See, dads, this begins on the t-ball field. This begins when you're cheering them on and you're like, go get them, slugger. The words that you choose to use. Inspire them to greatness. My son Noah has been loving skimboarding lately. And in fact, he's like, when can we go to the beach? I want to go skimboarding. Well, while we were on vacation, he was getting pretty good at it, and he was learning how to do 360s on the skimboard. And one day he goes, Dad, how many 360s do you think I can do in a row? And in my head, I was going to say 3, and all of a sudden I said 5. You can do 5. He never did 5, but he didn't stop trying to do 5. If I had said, I think you can only do 1, he'd have hung his head and been like, yeah, I can do 1, and walked away. Inspire legends. Create legends. And let me trust me, I'm not there yet, but I've talked to a whole bunch of guys who are on the other side of raising kids. That is when you truly achieve legendary status. Is there anything better than what Jesus said in Matthew 5 when he says this, that let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. Dads, this is what it looks like to impact this next generation. See, you may have a few arrows that you care for. They've been put into your care. And the time is coming when you're going to let these arrows fly. For me, Tiffany and I were talking about, it's like we got about 6 more years with our oldest. Before that arrow, we loose that and it goes off into the world. This time is going to fly by. Do everything that you can to point them in the direction and let them soar. Small decisions determine destiny. Make those decisions in a way that others see your good deeds and, more importantly, glorify your Father in heaven.